All right, I have a comparison that we will probably get less backlash.
Okay.
Less backlash
Are
from.
you comparing having kids to getting pegged? I am. For some people, getting pegged is a really emotional, personal, important experience. Hello and welcome to the Pillow Talks podcast. We're your hosts, Vanessa
And Xander Marin.
I'm a sex therapist with over 20 years of experience.
And I'm just a regular dude. We share the ups and downs in our relationship while giving you step-by-step techniques for improving yours.
Make sure you subscribe for your weekly double date full of totally doable sex tips, practical relationship advice, hilarious and honest stories of what really goes on behind closed bedroom doors, and so much more. It's the sex education you wish you'd had. What happens when you have a fantasy that your partner is just not into? When your yum is their yuck?
Or their yuck is your yum.
For today's episode, we turned to our Instagram community and we asked for stories. Like, do you have any secret fantasies that you either think your partner wouldn't be into, maybe you're too afraid to tell them, or maybe you have shared with your partner and got a pretty bad reaction? And we even have some stories of people who kind of tried the fantasy out a little bit to some not so great results. Mm-hmm. So in today's episode, we are going to be sharing with you some pretty fascinating stories, honestly. We've got stuff about being dominated, pegging, licking buttholes. We're really covering all the things.
Yeah.
And we're going to be giving you our best advice for what to do if you and your partner have a fantasy that is not shared. So first, before we get into the stories, I want to share some general tips about fantasies, because we have a lot of misconceptions about fantasies. I think just even the general topic makes people really nervous. It brings up shame and embarrassment. So let's kind of break down some fantasy myths. The first is that it's totally normal to have a fantasy that you don't actually want to try out in real life. Like, that's part of what makes a fantasy. It's like something that you're playing with in your mind. I think a lot of us have examples of this, of stuff outside of the bedroom. Like maybe you kind of secretly have a fantasy of like being the next Taylor Swift or opening for Taylor Swift or something like that. But you're like, yeah, I don't actually, when I think about what Taylor Swift's life actually looks like I don't truly want that, but it's fun to just daydream about it sometimes. Like, oh my God, that would be so cool, so fun, so over the top.
Yeah, I think we have these in like all kinds of aspects of life. We think, oh, wouldn't it be amazing to like be the CEO of the company that I work at? Or wouldn't it be amazing?
That's a really nerdy fantasy. I don't know if too many people are fantasizing about being CEOs.
All right. Well, I don't know. Or like, okay. Well, I mean, little kids are like, oh, like to be an astronaut or to be the president or things like that, where it's like we can totally fantasize about something, and we can also be really clear that I don't ever actually want to do that. I don't think I would want to do that.
It's also very normal and very common to have a fantasy that your partner is not into, or vice versa. Like, I think people get so freaked out about this, like, oh, we're incompatible. And yes, like we are going to talk about some stories where there might be a true incompatibility there. But the bottom line is you're two different people. Of course, you're going to have two different sets of interests. We always make food comparisons, and it's such a good comparison here. Like, Xander and I don't like all the same food. Xander loves mussels and clams, and I think they're absolutely disgusting. Like,
you can hear it in her voice.
He loves
clams,
hazelnuts. Oh, I like hate even saying the word. But I don't look at that and think like, oh my God, what does that mean about us? Are we not actually a good match for each other? Maybe we're not compatible. It's just like, no, we accept. No, we're different people. Of course we have different likes and dislikes.
Also, I don't want to eat clams, mussels, and hazelnuts every single meal. That would be quite a combo. Hazelnut steamed mussels and clams. That sounds disgusting, actually.
Yeah. So it's like, of course, it's an issue of intensity, right? Like, let's say Xander and I had no foods in common that we like to eat. Like, obviously, that would be an issue. Just the same way, like, if there was no commonalities in what you like to do in the bedroom. And yeah, if Xander liked to only eat hazelnuts, clams, and mussels. Ugh. Like that would be an issue, just like it could be in the bedroom. But the bottom line of like having some things where there's a mismatch, like that's normal. We all need to expect that. That's very, very common.
Okay. Also, I think there's this idea that if you have a fantasy, you must therefore need to try it in real life. Like, we kind of already got at the idea that like, it's totally normal to have a fantasy and not necessarily want to try it. But then I think there also can be this expectation from a partner as soon as they hear something that you're expressing some curiosity in and you're not into it, there's this immediate jump to like, oh my God, they're never going to be satisfied unless they try it. And then even beyond that, there's the like, oh my God, if they are really into fill in the blank, if they're really into that, if I fulfill that fantasy for them, like they're only ever going to want that. Or like they're never going to be satisfied with like the typical sex that we do have. And I think that these can be some problematic lines of thinking. I think we'll probably refer back to a lot of these as we're going through these examples. But yeah, in both of these, that doesn't have to be the case. And almost all the time, I would say it's not the case.
Yeah, we are not going to share this story, but I remember when we were going through the submissions, there were a lot of like, my partner wants to try anal, but I'm afraid that once he has a taste of anal sex, that like my vagina will never be good enough for him ever again. And like, that's just not true. It's not like, once you've tried something, like you could never go back to anything else.
I mean, yeah, we can bring that back to a couple different food comparisons. Like there's okay, once we go to like a Michelin starred restaurant, well, how dare we ever do that? Because then like home cooking will never be good enough. All we will ever want to eat is Michelin star food.
Yeah,
and
no, you have different appetites for different things.
I don't know. I've never heard anybody having that experience. Like, oh, I went out to a nice restaurant and now I won't cook again. I can never go to any other restaurant because this was so good. Yeah. So there's that element of it. And then, I mean, the other element, if you think that is kind of absurd, there's the reality of like, you guys both might cook the same dish, but like maybe one of you cooks it better than the other. That doesn't mean that like the person that cooks it worse or something, like that you could never eat that.
Yeah.
The reality is we deal with just different levels of experiences of all kinds of things that bring us pleasure, whether that's food, whether that's hobbies, whether that's going to a movie, reading a book, or having sex. Like the reality is that it's not like we're just chasing this pinnacle peak experience constantly.
Also, when it comes to fantasies, a lot of times people see them in black and white. Like either we do the fantasy or we don't do the fantasy. And that puts a lot of pressure on, especially if it's a fantasy that you're like, I'm not really into this thing. So we really recommend not looking at it in that way because that's not the only way to play around with fantasies. There actually are a lot of in-between gray areas that you can play around with. The holiday season is upon us, and if you are looking for some great gifts to give all the men in your life, we have got to tell you about Jack Black. We had a very fun package that got delivered to our house just the other day, filled with all of Jack Black's holiday gift sets. So if you've never heard about Jack Black before, they offer a full line of men's products from cleansing to moisturizing, beard care, so that your guy has skincare that always makes him look good and feel good. So these kits are incredible, like so many great products bundled together. They even come with a little ribbon wrapped around them so you can like hang them directly on the tree or just like wrap it up right together. I think these are great gifts to have in your closet for that person that you like randomly forgot to get a gift for and they come and bring you a gift and you're like, oh, just 1 second, let me come bring this to you. The gift sets look very cool and we are really excited to have Jack Black on board as a podcast sponsor because Xander has actually been using their products for years.
Yeah, I absolutely love Jack Black. I've been using their deodorant forever. It smells so good. So good. It works so well. Vanessa steals it all the time. And Jack Black's products, whether it's the deodorant, the lip balm, the face cream with SPF in it, these are such great gifts for perhaps even the male partner in your life who you would love to take a little bit better care of their body, of their face, of their skin, but they don't even know where to start, like with all of your products, or maybe you don't want them to use your nice fancy products, Jack Black is definitely going to make your guy feel better about face care.
And I'm always paying attention to ingredients. That's very important to me in my own skincare. And I really love that Jack Black's products are very no nonsense. They use the best ingredients, never ever tested on animals, nothing complicated, just superior skincare.
This holiday season, if you want simple, effective products that your significant other is going to love, you need Jack Black. Head on over to getjackblack.com/pillow and use code PILLOW for 10% off your order. Once again, that's getjackblack.com/pillow for 10% off. And make sure you use our promo code PILLOW so they know that we sent you.
So like, let's use the example of having group sex, like having an orgy. Mm-hmm. Somebody might say, okay, I'm not into actually doing that. I don't want to physically have sex with other people. But can we break it down a little bit? Maybe one step could be, can we just talk dirty about it? That's like our favorite suggestion for any fantasy where there's like a little disagreement between the two of you. Like, just talk dirty about it.
Yeah, it's like the idea is sexy, and so let's just play around with the idea verbally.
Yeah, like for the person who has that fantasy, sometimes just being able to talk about it out loud, like because our fantasies feel so secretive and taboo and forbidden, like it can feel exhilarating just to be able to like say out loud, like I'm into this and it turns me on and I like it. Often that can just be satisfying in and of itself. Or if we go back to this group sex example, like are there some other little aspects of it? So maybe it's like the two of you could look for sex parties or sex clubs in your area. And there's just this thrill of like, ooh, there is a party that's happening. Like we could go to it.
Oh, we could. Maybe we will. Maybe we won't.
Yeah. Or it could be maybe one person is like, okay, I don't want to have sex with other people, but I'm fine being in the room when other people are having sex. Or maybe it's like, I'm fine with you participating, but I just hang back. Like there's so many different ways that you can break it down and look at it. And again, like everybody gets to have their own interests, their own boundaries, but you don't need to look at it as either we go whole hog or we do nothing at all. So looking for some middle ground. Okay, so we're going to be using those principles to kind of guide us through a lot of these stories, but let's get into the stories themselves. So here's the first one. I have a fantasy about wanting to have my wife's underwear on during sex. For me, it only feels good if she wants it, and even better if she actually picks out which pair I wear. My wife and I tried this once several years ago before we were engaged. She has a smaller frame than I do, so the panties... I'm sorry. I hate the word panties. It's so difficult.
Why don't you just say chonies?
The underwear. So the underwear were just a little snug on me. When she saw me in them, she accidentally let out a laugh. We made out and used our hands on each other for a few minutes, but then she said it felt too strange for me to be in them, so I took them off. I felt so ridiculous and so unsexy that I still don't want to engage in any of my fantasies, and I don't know if I ever will again. We just have mundane sex now, which is still nice for us mostly, but I feel like I can't introduce any new ideas because they're too odd for her. Xander, what are your thoughts on this fantasy conundrum?
The first question I have is, did you share with her what that experience was like for you? Because I would imagine it's highly unlikely that that her little laugh was like, oh my God, that he looks so ridiculous. Like, let me shame him.
Yeah.
Like, let's shame the shit out of him. I am sure that is not what was going on for her. And something may have been going on for her. She may have been unprepared for that, or, she absolutely may have felt a little uncomfortable. But I would suspect, given the way that you described feeling like you need to keep all this stuff inside now, I would suspect that you guys didn't really fully debrief on what happened. And I feel like now you've jumped to the conclusion that she was laughing at you, that she was trying to shame you, that she's not open to anything. And I think she needs to have an opportunity to understand, what feelings came up for you, that was a highly vulnerable thing for you, what that impact was on you, and to be able to respond
well, also,
to that.
I would just say, like, I totally understand that when you're doing something very vulnerable and your partner laughs, like, of course, that feels really tough and scary and like, oh my God, I feel like I'm being judged. So
100%.
I have a lot of compassion for him in this situation. And laughing during sex is really normal. Like you're saying, I don't think she meant it to be like, I want to make you feel bad about yourself. Like, sex is awkward and uncomfortable sometimes, especially when we're trying new things. And a lot of us respond to discomfort with like nervous laughter. So it's more about her and what she's feeling in that moment rather than you. So I think like the fact that this guy, he like went so quickly to this place of shutdown of like, you laughed, you didn't like it, so now I don't like it and I can never do it again. Like, I don't think that that's a fair or healthy response to have. So we are recording this podcast from our bed, which is currently draped in Cozy Earth bedding.
Draped.
Yeah, you like that word? Cozy Earth has been one of our longest and our favorite podcast sponsors. We really appreciate their support of Pillow Talks, but we also really appreciate their products. Oh my God, their sheets are the softest sheets I've ever experienced.
About as cozy as it gets.
Yeah, I mean, if you're somebody who just really wants softness in your life, you're going to need to check out Cozy Earth.
And if you don't want softness in your life,
then
I have questions.
You?
I have questions for you.
So we have the Cozy Earth bedding, but they also make incredible towels. We have tried out their pajamas. The pajamas are next level, like so incredibly soft. And all of their fabrics are temperature regulating. The sheets are super breathable, so you'll sleep several degrees cooler. They have enhanced fabrics with durable weave that won't pill. It's guaranteed for 10 years. They're also very focused on responsible production of all of their products, durability, and commitment to quality. Like I just said, there's a 10-year warranty. That's how much they believe in their products. Personally, I have just been eyeing their brand new cuddle blankets.
Ooh.
There's a cuddle blanket and a bubble cuddle blanket. And
I like the sound of that.
Yeah, it's like a faux fur kind of thing. And I
say less, babe. Say less.
Oh, and there's a bubble cuddle pillow to go along with it too. Oh my God. They're always coming out with new products, which is so exciting. You can literally have softness all the time.
Winter's coming and we need this in our life.
So visit cozyearth.com/pillowtalks and use our exclusive, wait for this, guys. I don't know if we've ever had a code from them this big.
This is a big one.
40% off code.
Get it.
Pillow Talks is the code. So cozyearth.com/pillowtalks and use the code Pillow Talks to get 40% off. Give the gift of luxury this season. And if you get a post-purchase survey, please tell them that you heard about Cozy Earth from this podcast. So there are a couple of other things here. He says, for me, it only feels good if she wants it. And I think that that's actually a really unfair position to put your partner in when they are not into the fantasy. Yeah. Like, it sounds like she was being a really good generous, sport. Giving partner. Like, okay, this is not my thing, but like, I want to do it for you, so let's try it. And I understand, I completely understand, like, of course it's sexier when you know your partner's into it and really wants it too. But like, I just don't think that's a realistic expectation. So I would have told him like, okay, if that's what you want it to be, I don't think that that's a fair ask. If you're okay with her saying like, hey, I'm not into it, but like, let's play around with it, I'm willing to do this for you, then yes, go ahead and experiment. But I would not experiment if you're like, no, I want it to be this way.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I want you to want it naturally.
And in the same way that I want it, which I don't think is fair.
Yeah, I mean, that being said, if you want to rewind the tape and be like, if you have a fantasy like this where it is very important to you that your partner share like the same desire for that fantasy, then it's like that is something to almost like vet in the dating process. Like, am I with someone that is legitimately sharing this thing where I can reasonably expect them to be into it? Yeah. You know, I think that in this case, it would be fair to be like, hey, in my fantasy, you really want this and that you are requesting I wear these specific ones. And it would be fair to say, you know, hey, would you be open to this? Like, I know that this isn't something that you are actively into yourself. Knowing that I'm actively into it, you know, if I request that we fulfill this fantasy on a given night, once you receive that request, then can you follow that, pretend to be excited, pick out a pair, where then you are playing the role of someone who, once we go, okay, we're going to do this tonight, then, then the script kicks in where it's like, oh, hell yeah, we're doing this. Like here, I went and got you these special ones, that kind of thing. But yeah, unless you have gone into dating someone being like, this is a fantasy that we need to share, it's not reasonable to just expect her to develop the same fantasy.
Yeah. Also, you already brought up the idea of kind of doing this debrief of telling her how it felt. But I also think it would be very valuable to have a debrief about how did that go? And do we want to do this again? So if I try to put myself in her shoes, she's like, okay, I'm not really into this, but I'm going to try for my partner. I see him, the underwear are just objectively too small, which is funny. We just have to acknowledge that just is funny. It's like somebody wearing, underwear that are very clearly too small, too large. There's just a silliness to that. So she sees that. She kind of lets out a little bit of a laugh. She keeps going. She tries it for a little bit. And then she's like, okay, it's feeling a little bit weird. So why don't we stop? But it very well may be for her, okay, that was my first time trying it. It was a little bit awkward. I wasn't quite sure, but hey, let's try it again. I don't see from this that she was like, oh my God, that was horrible. I hated that. It did not work. I never want to do that again. Didn't feel good to me. It just seemed like you tried something new for the first time and it was a little awkward, which is pretty much the case. Anybody tries anything new sexually for the first time. We have a whole rule about this. We call this the first pancake rule. The first pancake, whenever you make pancakes, it always turns out a little weird. Sex is the same way. So we need to make space for that weirdness. And it makes me sad that he was like, okay, my fantasy didn't go perfectly the very first time we tried it. So now I'm resigning myself to a lifetime of mundane sex and I'm never going to tell her my fantasies ever again. That's just too extreme of a reaction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, having that kind of debrief can then open the door to, hey, okay, would we or would we not try this one again? Or would we, should we talk about other types of fantasies? Because the reality is, if you have other ones, I think that it is, if you're in a committed long-term relationship with this person, you want to be able to share all of yourself with them. And, I think that your partner would like to know if you have other fantasies and have the opportunity at least to see, one, they might be into some of them, or two, they might be open to experimenting with some of them. And I would bet that after this experience, especially if you're like, hey, that was challenging for me when I heard your laugh. I didn't know what was behind it. Also, if you talk about it, you will understand what may have been coming up for your wife rather than assuming that she was just trying to shame you. So yeah, and then I think that the next time you were to try something, it would probably go a little bit better because she would likely be more aware of okay, yeah, I'm gonna try not to laugh or something like that next time.
Okay, so bottom line, do a debrief, buy some panties that fit you, and try this one again.
Yeah, it's never too late to bring something up because this is the type of thing that does eventually turn into resentment. I think resentment and bitterness for people when it's there's this thing that happened. I never said anything about it. I'm holding it inside. Now I'm actively withholding other things. And especially if those other things, those fantasies, you start thinking about them more and more, then pretty soon you're telling a story, oh, my wife isn't into it. She doesn't want to see all of me. And it's she's never even had a chance to combat that story going on in your head.
This holiday season, if you're looking to give gifts that are actually meaningful and not just going to end up in the trash as soon as you leave, we are so excited to introduce you to StoryWorth. So here's how StoryWorth works. Every week, they email your loved one a thought-provoking question, and you get to help pick these questions. So they're things like, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? Or what's the farthest you've ever traveled? Or how did you get to school every day? They make the writing process for your loved one a breeze. All they need to do is just respond to that email with a story, long or short, it doesn't matter. You get emailed a copy of their responses, so you right away get that instant gratification of seeing your loved one respond to these questions, learning more things about them. But then this is the really freaking cool part. StoryWorth takes all of these stories from an entire year and then compiles them along with photos into a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you will be able to share and revisit for generations to come. So that's what we mean, like a meaningful gift. I mean, how much more meaningful does it get than getting to really know your partner or your parent or your sibling, like to hear these stories that you maybe have never heard before and to get them all in this beautiful book. We sent both of my parents through StoryWorth last year when they first came on as a podcast sponsor, and they had so much fun, like writing their stories, finding their photos. It's just incredible to know we have these keepsakes that will be handed down to generations for generations and generations to come. StoryWorth has more than 35,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot, with millions of stories preserved since they were founded over 10 years ago. With StoryWorth, I'm giving those I love most a thoughtful, personal gift from the heart and preserving their memories and stories for years to come. Go to storyworth.com/pillow and save $10 on your first purchase. That's storyworth.com/pillow to save $10 on your first purchase.
All right, let's move on to our next one. My husband is into being dominated. He would gladly take it as far as I'm willing to go, but I am not into it. It's not that it crosses a boundary or anything. I just take no pleasure in it. It feels like a catch-22 because he wants me to have my way, but my way would not include most of the things he suggests. He has given me specific ideas or scenarios he'd like, and I feel like there's an expectation that I might occasionally choose to follow one, but how can I do that when none of it sounds appealing to me? Whenever I try some things, I am not turned on and I do not feel confident. I want to be able to give him what he wants from time to time, but it also feels like it's not enjoyable for either of us since he's aware that I'm not into it. Is there a way for me to find more enjoyment out of giving him what he wants? Or is there a happy medium?
Okay, so I think there are a lot of similar dynamics here to the first one around the how much pleasure does the partner who's going along with it have to take in it? And again, like we said last time, like I think that the answer should be low. So the person who wrote this is having this expectation that they're supposed to be really like into it, supposed to take a lot of pleasure from it. And I would advise them like, no, that's just not going to be the reality. That you're not into this. That's totally okay. And telling the husband as well, like we've got to put the bar for expectations down a bit, that your partner's not going to be like super, super into it, but they're still willing to go along with it. We talked a little bit, like you mentioned, Xander, scripting things out. And I do think that's really helpful when we're playing around with fantasies, is like people go into it sometimes and they're like, let's just do the fantasy. But truly playing around with a fantasy, it involves a lot more legwork than a lot of people realize. And I think people get into their heads thinking like, well, I just want it to like flow naturally and to, just happen the same way we think about with any kind of sex. But the reality is that fantasies require effort. They require communication and setup. So having like a script around it or having like specific things, where you're role playing it, that can be really helpful. And then once even just the word role play, you're like, oh, I am playing a role. So that helps us actually, in a funny way, like get more into it because we know we're playing a role rather than feeling this expectation on ourselves that like, I have to authentically, as my real self, be super into doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is an area where we really need to take some notes from the kink community and like sort of like the Dom sub BDSM community, because like if you kind of dive into how those communities operate, that it's not very often that it's like you have two people that are equally into the same thing where it's like, oh, I'm super into being a Dom and I'm super into being a sub, and now let's go. Like there are a lot of very specific scenes that get created. And I think one of the interesting things for someone that is looking to be very submissive or to be dominated is that very often that person, the submissive person, may actually have a lot more input into what that scene is at the beginning. It's not that they want to be completely dominated 100% of the time. They want to be dominated during the scene. They may even dominate the coming up with what the scene is. Because honestly, it's like they're the ones whose boundaries need to be completely respected. Like, it's not fair play when it's like someone is dominant and they're just like, I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want. Like, that is totally not okay. Like, the person that is submissive needs to set clear ground rules and maybe even needs to set up the entire scene, like what it is that they are looking for. So, that gets into the more role-playing thing. You're literally writing out a script or writing out a scene where there's like specific things you want to happen, general things that you want to have happen. And then, I think that the other part is that, a lot of those sort of scenes, it is not necessarily about both partners deriving equivalent satisfaction. I think that there's an element of like knowing one person is going to get a lot of pleasure out of this, and the other person is getting pleasure out of participating in that with the partner and seeing how much pleasure or enjoyment the other person is able to get out of something. It's sort of like the enjoying, like just like being a good person, like being there to help that person have an experience that they want to experience. So I wonder if you can get yourself into that headspace where it's like, this isn't about you, like authentically enjoying it from a sexual pleasure perspective in the moment, but like, can you flip it around and be like, I love seeing my partner happy. I love seeing them getting a lot of pleasure. I mean, this is kind of like, giving oral sex. Giving oral sex, most people are not going to like have an orgasm from giving oral sex, but it can be very pleasurable to see your partner getting so much pleasure. So can you think of it in that way?
My final thought on this one is I really can't get a sense from the person writing it of their willingness here. So is it like, hey, look, I'm just not really into dominating, but I'm totally fine to do it for you and, because I know it brings you pleasure? Or is it getting to a point where it's like, I am not into this. I don't like doing it. It doesn't feel good. Like, I guess I just don't get a sense of, does this person feel like they have any agency or any ability to say like, hey, look, I gave this a really fair shot, but I'm just not into it and I don't want to do it again. So I would encourage them to spend a little time thinking about that. Like, do you want to continue doing this? Because you are allowed to say no.
Yeah, I mean, I think a dynamic that often comes up with someone who is not particularly comfortable, especially like maybe in male-female relationships, if like the male partner is asking the woman to do something, like, she may feel uncomfortable being like, just no, I'm not into that. And so it feels easier to be like, oh, well, I'm just not sure, or like, I'm not very confident in this, as a way of sort of like lessening the blow. But like in this case, for us to really help you out, it's like, we need to know, like, is this a just firm no for you? In which case it is totally fine and acceptable to be like, no, that is just not for me, versus, I'm into that. I just legitimately don't feel very confident in it. In which case, it's more about you playing a role that your partner helps you determine that role.
Okay, let's move on to our next one. My husband has a fantasy of me pegging him. It makes me extremely uncomfortable to even think about. I'm fine with other people doing whatever they want, but for me, it kind of makes me sick to my stomach to think about. He recently told me that he likes to be submissive and plays with toys that way. Our normal dynamic is him being dominant to me, and it has always been that for the last 12 years. I'm not sure how to compromise around it. Can I try to be more open about it? Maybe try smaller things and work our way up to that? I still cannot say that I will ever be okay with it. My husband says that this is going to be a deal breaker, whether it's now or later. He says it's a need for him. He told me that he has 3 options. He stays in our relationship and suppresses this, which he's not sure he will ever be okay with. Or either he has someone else do it to him, male or female, and I don't know about it, or I do know about it and open our relationship up. The main questions that come up for me are, will I ever actually come around to being okay with it? Can I? Are there things I can do to open my mind? I love my husband dearly, but I don't want to be keeping him trapped when he may be able to find someone who will give him what he needs. I guess another question that I've been trying to understand is, why is this such a need for him? He says sometimes toys are enough. I know he would rather someone else do it than me because of how our relationship and sexual chemistry has been. Can sexual chemistry change? I'm assuming I know the answer to that already. What do you do when you're afraid you can't meet your partner's needs? What happens if I'm a hard no? no and can't do it? What if I'm not okay with him seeking anything outside our marriage? I've thought of going on a break, but I still would not be okay with him sleeping with other people while we aren't together. Coming back together just gives me the ick thinking about. It would change literally everything.
Well, this is a tough one.
This is a really tough one.
I mean, this is this is very different from the first one where, we're not really sure how well the person can bear like going the rest of their life without indulging, the underwear fantasy or the other fantasies that they said that they have. They didn't tell us what they were. I do appreciate in this one that, we understand the full extent of it. I hurt for both of these people where, for him, he knows that this is a real kind of like deal breaker, like strong need that he needs fulfilled, for him to feel fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And also that, I guess the person writing in is basically saying that they aren't really into it, but like maybe opening the door.
No, I don't think so. I think
it sounds like
I think she's trying really, really hard to like consider the possibility of it. But ultimately, and she's the only person who knows this. But to me, it's like she's saying it makes her sick to her stomach to think about doing it. Like that's not something that you really get over. And our intention in making this episode is not to like pressure people into doing things that they don't feel comfortable doing. Like if you're having that strong of a reaction, you shouldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it like would not be fair for us to not say like just ask the one question of like, are you absolutely sure that what's coming up for you is not some internalized homophobia? Because I think this is something that really that comes up so often with any kind of anal play when it's like men receiving the anal play. We are so hardwired to have this internalized homophobia where we associate any kind of anal play and especially penetrative anal play with being gay. And that is something that gay men do, and that cannot be something that any other kind of man can do, when in reality, gay, straight, anything, a butt is a butt. It has the same nerve endings. Men and women have the same nerve endings. In fact, men actually probably derive more satisfaction from anal play because men can also get a lot of pleasure from the prostate, which can be stimulated from inside the anus. So yeah, if anything, men actually are set up to enjoy anal play, whether they are straight or not.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Liking anal play does not say anything about your sexual orientation.
Yeah, men can have orgasms from just prostate stimulation.
Yeah, it's just nerve endings. It's not orientation. So that is a good thing to examine. But otherwise, so let's say that she's like, no, I'm really and truly just not into this at all. I do think that the way he's laid it out, that's fair. Those are the options here. And I do think there are some rare situations with fantasies where it does boil down to it. So, he does give the option of basically I can cheat on you and you don't know about it, that's not an option. But the basic options that they're left with are that he does not ever get to fully have this experience, or that they open the relationship up. And it sounds like she's not okay as well with opening the relationship up. So,
well, wait, I just want to say, you said that him doing it without her knowledge, that is an arrangement that some people have. That is a fair arrangement if both people are going into that willingly. I just wanted to make sure.
It's a don't ask, don't tell policy.
Yeah, it's an arrangement that we often don't recommend. No. Unless both partners are really into that idea, because there are a lot of inherent issues with it, and it's also not reasonable to expect that that no one will ever find out about something, and so it can create a lot of challenges when inherently something does slip, because we aren't perfect, or even if you run into each other out on a date with somebody or whatever, because we can't totally control that, but no, that is, if both of you were into that, that is a valid option to consider. It sounds like you are not into that, and so that is a very invalid option to consider in your case.
So ultimately, I think that the decision comes down to him because it is his fantasy. So what I want to speak to is her question about I've been trying to understand why this is such a need for him. I know it's tempting to think of it as like, this is just a sexual act. How could it possibly be that strong that we're like talking about, you know, either opening up the relationship or ending the relationship over? And we actually did a story this weekend where we talked about fantasies, and I talked about the possibility of people needing to walk away from a relationship if they're not able to like fulfill it. And we got a lot of backlash from people saying like, I can't believe you would tell people to end a marriage over a fantasy. So like, I get that on the surface, it sounds like ending an entire relationship over one sexual act that you can't agree on. But the bottom line is that some fantasies really and truly are so central to our expression of our sexuality, of who we are, that the idea of never doing it doesn't feel okay. And maybe the word fantasy is the wrong word for it, because again, fantasy, like, it conjures up like, oh, just something fun and silly and playful, like, you know, we're role playing, or you're putting on your little naughty nurse costume or something like that. So it's not necessarily that it's a fantasy. It's like, it's an act that's really central to someone's expression. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the case for him here. Like, he feels that being pegged, being able to like, and again, it's like on the surface, like being pegged, like, come on, dude, just get over it, or just use a toy. But I'm guessing there's something much deeper for him here. Like, maybe it's being able to have the experience of fully receiving. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's being able to overcome his own internalized homophobia and fears of exploring his own body. Maybe it's like just wanting to feel permission to experience pleasure in every part of his body. Like, there could be much deeper things behind this. And so for him, that's why it's like, yeah, this is not just a fun little thing to play with. This is like something that I need to do in my life to feel fulfilled. Maybe this sounds, I'm sure we're going to get backlash against this comparison, but what's just popping into my head right now is like, it's like the decision to have kids, right? Like, for a lot of people, it's like, my life will not feel complete unless I have kids. Mm-hmm. That is so central to my identity, to what I want to experience in life, to like what I see for myself, that they are willing to walk away from otherwise incredible, beautiful, fulfilling relationships because that person doesn't want to have kids. And like, we've normalized that and given permission to that. Like, that makes sense to us. We're like, yeah, if you want to have kids and your partner doesn't, like, of course that's painful. Of course that sucks. But like, you should get to have kids if that's so like important to you. And like, some sexual desires fall into that same sort of category where it's not just an act, it's an experience.
All right, I have a comparison that we will probably get less backlash.
Okay.
Less backlash
from.
Are
you comparing having kids to getting pegged? Like, I am. For some people, getting pegged is a really emotional, personal, important experience.
All right, so my comparison, let's say that you come out bisexual.
Yes.
When you are in a relationship with, let's say you're with an opposite sex partner. You've only ever been with opposite sex partners, and you realize or come to terms with / come out as bisexual in that relationship. And you're like, I've never had a same-sex sexual experience. I've never had a same-sex partner. But, you know, if you are in that situation, and lots of people find themselves in situations like this, whether it's bisexuality or any other type of sexuality where you are into something else that you have not experienced yet, and you're in a committed relationship, and people have to decide, am I okay? Can I accept that I may never experience this thing and stay in this relationship that I'm in because I love them and it's a great relationship? No one's done anything wrong. Mm-hmm. Or does this feel so central to me that I need to be able to explore it? And, you know, I think that this sounds like a similar thing. And it sounds like this person, they've been in a relationship for the last 12 years. And this person probably thought at the beginning, you know what? I think that I can probably be okay without this. You know, I doubt that they were like, I am secretly going to need this. And 12 years in, I'm going to drop the bomb that I have to have it. 12 years in, I'm going to use this so that I can like get a backdoor out of this relationship into an open relationship. Like, no, I bet you he has been suffering with this for a long time. He probably thought, I love this person so much. I think I can probably, or whatever. Even at then, you probably think, I'm going to be fine never indulging this. Or, you know, I'm going to try with toys to indulge it as much as I can. But like, we are allowed to change our minds. Like, you're allowed to change your mind about being in a relationship, in a marriage. You know, like, we commit to marriage for life. Most people commit to marriage for life when they get married. And yet we are, you know, minds get changed. Divorces happen. Like, we accept that that is something that happens. That's a risk inherent in relationships. And so, you know, unfortunately, I think that this guy has realized, unfortunately, 12 years in, that he's at a kind of breaking point with this.
Yeah. So ultimately, I do think it's his decision to make. He's the only person who can feel into for himself. Like, being pegged, is it something that truly is so central to my experience, to my expression, to my sexuality, that I cannot imagine living a life without getting to experience this? Or is it something where he's like, this is something that I really, really wish I could explore, but I also recognize, like, you know, I'm in this incredible partnership. There are so many other aspects of it that I love and cherish. And even though this is difficult, I am consciously, willingly making the decision to say, I'm going to stay in this relationship and not get to express something like this. And he's the only one who can decide that.
Yeah, I think at this point, he has laid it out really fairly and honestly to you of, look, these are the options the way I see it. I think he's basically telling you, this is a central part of my sexuality, and I need to be able to experience it, whether it's with you or with other people, and whether we are together or not together. And now I think, as hard as it is, I think now you need to be honest with him about which of those options you are and aren't okay with. And so if you are very clearly not okay with opening the relationship, whether known or unknown, like, he needs to be able to have that information, because then the only remaining two options are he suppresses it, which he said he doesn't really want to do, but he did lay it out there as, you know, something that I could try to do. He's presumably been doing that for many years, or that he needs to walk away. It's only fair to him, you know, that you meet his vulnerability with your vulnerability and share, you know, unfortunately, as hard as it is, as much as I love you, I'm not open to two of these options. And so unfortunately, I think that leaves two really bad options for us. And ultimately, this is going to be on you to make the final decision, because you are saying that this is a central part of your sexuality that, you know, I probably wasn't aware of at the beginning of our relationship. All right, on that note, let's move on. My husband has a fantasy of hooking up, sex, blowjobs, anal with other guys. I've tried being open about it and trying to get into it, but it just makes me feel uncomfortable. Uncomfortable in the sense of insecure. Like, does he actually want to be with me, a woman, long term, or is this just a fantasy? He always insists it's just a fantasy, but then after we are done having sex, he gets all embarrassed and awkward and says he regrets saying those things. I try to be open and supportive and say it's okay if it's your fantasy, and I try not to be judgmental. We've compromised on not bringing up that particular fantasy every time we have sex, because for a while it was every time, and it really completely turned me off. Okay, so how do I know it's truly a fantasy? I weirdly fear down the road that he's going to want to act on it. He doesn't really have any other fantasy, so it's hard to talk about any other fantasies. Other questions. Does anyone else have this fantasy of having sex with someone of the same sex? Sometimes his fantasy is just straight up sucking a dick, and other times his fantasy is sucking a dick while I'm involved. When he says I'm involved with it, I don't feel as uncomfortable with it. But when it's just straight up having sex with another guy, it makes me uncomfortable and anxious.
Straight up sucking a dick. That phrase just makes me giggle for some reason. Okay, so let's start with this question of, does anyone else have a fantasy of having sex with someone of the same sex? Abso-freaking-lutely.
Yeah, all the time.
This is one of the most common fantasies, and it's a perfect example of, for a lot of people, not for all of them, but for a lot of people, this is one of those fantasies that is just fun to play with as a fantasy, but people wouldn't want to actually act on in real life. This comes up with women all the time.
Oh yeah, way more than men. I mean, this gets at the internalized homophobia.
That's where I was going next. But like, yeah, so many women reach out to us and they're like, I am straight. Like, I absolutely am straight. I have no interest.
I feel it in my bones.
Actually being with another woman, but like, I love to fantasize about it. I love to read erotica about it. I love to watch porn that's lesbian porn. It's just normal. It's totally normal. The problem is all of the homophobia that we have. Like, it makes it so much harder for men to have this fantasy than for women. When women have same-sex fantasies about being with other women, most people think of that as really hot. But when
I mean, women even like will joke with other women about like hooking up. I think there's like it's like acceptable to have like almost like sexual chemistry between women where it's never going to happen. It's like you just don't see men like doing that.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, you're actually making me think of on this season of Real Housewives of New York, there's one woman, Brynn, who's straight, and she's always flirting with this lesbian woman, Jenna, and like flirting, you know, talking about how, oh, they're going to hook up and she's going to turn lesbian and all this stuff. So like, yes, that is something that women will occasionally joke about with each other. But yeah, no, men, like I could not imagine a man, like a straight man joking with another straight man about how like, oh, we're going to hook up.
Yeah, no.
Wait, but I don't know, kind of sometimes guys do a little bit, like talking about having man crushes and stuff like that.
Yeah, but when's the last time you heard a guy be like, oh, watch out, I'm going to suck your dick?
Okay, fine. Fair enough. Anyways, all that to say, it's like we don't give men the same societal permission to like just have same-sex fantasies the way that we give women societal permission to have that. So yes, it's very normal to have this fantasy. That being said, I could also absolutely see a scenario where, again, because of homophobia, your husband might actually be bisexual, but he doesn't want to admit it because he's afraid and like thinks that that's a bad thing. And like people would judge him for that. You would judge him for that. So there's like a fine line to walk here where I don't want to put like more paranoia in your brain of like, yeah, he's secretly gay. He's dreaming about straight up sucking a dick. But at the same time, I also like, I don't know, I feel for this man. And like, if he is genuinely interested, but like trying to pretend it's just a fantasy. It's just a fantasy. Cause like, I mean, he's talking about this every single time they have sex. Like him sucking up sucking a dick. It does veer a little into the like, maybe this is more than a fantasy territory for me. It's
little sus, little sus category.
Yeah, but again, like
sus straight up sucking.
But in the best part, like he's allowed to. Like if he actually is kind of curious about being with men, that's awesome, and I want him to like celebrate that and to feel like that's okay. If it was me and every time we had sex, you were talking about sucking dick, I would pull you aside outside of the bedroom at a certain point and I would say like, I love you so much. And I know that you like talking dirty about sucking dick. And I just want you to know, like, if that's actually something, if that's just a fantasy, that's totally cool. If it's something that you actually kind of are a little bit curious about in real life, that is also totally cool. I love you and I want you to feel like you can be your full and authentic self with me. So I would have one conversation. I would not pester though. So let's say you were like, no, like it just is a fantasy. I just get turned on talking about sucking dick while I'm railing you. Then I would let it go. I wouldn't be like interrogating every time. Are you sure you're not gay? Are you sure you're not secretly gay? Like we don't want to go to that extreme, but I would ask once.
Yeah.
Like
I mean,
serious conversation.
you don't want to be like, hey, are you secretly gay? Or, hey, are you secretly bi? You're not trying to like out them. You're just trying to say, hey, if this is something like you're legit into, like we can talk about that. Mm-hmm. Like I'm here. Like you want to leave the door open, but not try to be like, hey, I think that you are gay and we need to talk about that. What was coming up for me with this one is a little bit of a flag to me was that like, after we're done having sex, he gets all embarrassed and awkward and says he regrets those things.
Yeah, same.
I'm interested. So on the one hand, that right there, that is textbook, like internalized homophobia, where what happens is we have that internalized homophobia. We have our walls up. Once we start getting sexual and getting excited, those sort of walls and boundaries start coming down. And all of a sudden it's like, our inhibitions come down as we're having sex. So then all of a sudden those things come out. And then as soon as we come, we got that classic post-nut clarity. And all of a sudden, boom, the walls come up, the shame comes back.
Yeah.
So that is sort of textbook internalized homophobia and shame cycle. On the other hand, there is also a possibility that that is part of the fantasy for him. Some people have like get off on shame, and there's sort of the shame is part of the fantasy. Possible, but he hasn't announced that to you. So it's like, I don't know, there's a possibility that he's still kind of figuring out like what this whole thing is for him. And it's possible that for him, like that actually he is almost looking for you to shame him a little bit. Like that would sort of complete the fantasy. But ultimately, I think it is unfair to you that this is a confusing experience for you. You don't know what it is that he truly wants. Like, is this, is him being like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. Is that part of the game for him? Or is that truly him being really ashamed? Regardless, I feel like there's a fair request to be made for you of like, hey, this is like really coming up a lot. And I'm feeling like ill-equipped to know how to show up as a good partner. This feels like something that would be really beneficial for you to explore in individual therapy, to either explore the internalized homophobia that's coming up for you, because it's not fair for you after every single time you have sex to have to like reassure him like, oh my God, it's okay. Like you don't need to be ashamed. Like that's not fair to you to be put into that role every time. And it's also like not fair to you to like have to read between the lines of like, oh, how am I supposed to react or respond? Like, is the shame part of the fantasy, or is it like not part of the fantasy and he's really truly ashamed? Like, I think he's got to figure that part out on his own, but he might need some encouragement from you to understand that like, yeah, he's putting you in an unfair situation. You want to be there and be a good partner to him, but you've reached a point where you don't know how to be a good partner.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is all the scenarios we have time for today. We had so many, but God, we always end up like going deep on these.
Well, there's a lot.
There's a lot to unpack for sure.
It's a big gray area. It would be easy. I mean, this isn't tiebreakers, babe.
I know. Well, let us know if you like this content. We have pretty much an entire other episode already in front of us right now. So we can make that very easily if you are into that. Come on over to Instagram. We're at Vanessa and Xander, and let us know if you liked this episode. Definitely make sure you're following us there if you're not already, because we do all sorts of fun polls. We do a lot of prep for these episodes, asking lots of questions. So we'd love to have you in our community over there.
And if you love this episode, we would love it if you would leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify and on Apple. And especially if you left us a review over on Apple Podcasts. Those reviews help the podcast grow, help other people know that we are a great podcast to listen to. So what you do is you go to the main Pillow Talks page on Apple Podcasts, scroll all the way to the bottom, leave your review. It doesn't have to be very long. And as a way of saying thank you for that, we will put you every week into our Review of the Week giveaway, where if you hear your review read, like I am just about to read one, and that's you, DM us on Instagram, email us at info@vmtherapy.com, and we will hook you up with a free masterclass. That's how much we love you. So without further ado, game-changing power couple, 5 stars. Vanessa and Xander are truly changing relationships and marriages. They're creating content that my husband and I didn't know we needed. From their podcast to their book, from their Instagram to their courses, we both love everything they create. They add value, create a new, healthier narrative, and are surely changing the trajectory of my partnership. Love their authenticity, and I'm so grateful they chose to do this work.
Oh, thank you for that delightful review. Oh, we know this person.
We do?
Yeah.
Oh, we do. We do.
know you.
Thank you. Thank you to this person. And yeah, I'm really grateful I chose to do this work. I never thought that I was going to be doing this work until honestly fairly recently. And it has changed the trajectory of my life and my partnership as well. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, that is all for today's episode of Pillow Talks. Thank you so much for listening. Join us again next week when we talk about what to do if you want more emotional intimacy in your relationship.